All right, hello, and welcome to the Yet Another Value podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Walker, and with me today, I'm excited to have on for the second time the founder of Marathon Partners, Mario Cibelli. Mario, how's it going?
All right, how are you doing?
Doing good. We were talking before. I know you just got a haircut, looking sharp for those people who are watching on YouTube. So, look, let me start the way the way I do every podcast, and that's by pitching you, my guest. People can go listen to our first podcast to hear a little bit more of my pitch, but I would just reiterate how much respect I had for the fundamental investing you do, and especially, people can go listen in December. You did an interview on Invest Like the Best, not to pitch another podcast, but I thought it was the best podcast I listened to last year. The fundamental work you did on Stitch Fix last year was incredible. People can listen to it and make their own judgment, but I'm just really happy to have you back on the podcast and really respect you as an investor.
Thanks. You're serious? You thought it was one of the best you heard last year?
Oh, absolutely. I was really into it.
I think Modest Proposal was on it. So,
well, he was on 2 years ago, so nobody can compare it to Modest Proposal. But it was really great. Loved hearing all the war stories and everything, and the stuff on Stitch Fix. It was so crazy to hear how much it rhymed to the stuff you did on Netflix a couple of years ago.
Yeah, Patrick creates a very natural, progression of conversation. Enjoyed doing it. Obviously, you warmed me up doing one this summer, so that made that one better. But yeah, I think I've gotten the most feedback on the whole Stitch Fix thing, which is only one piece of the puzzle of the whole thing. But our visit to that DC and Dallas was semi-epic. I mean, I do think my goal is to be a Stitch Fix shareholder 10 years from now. It's hard to accomplish sometimes. The valuations get pushed and pulled in all different directions, and sometimes the valuation tries to chase you out of the name. That happened on Netflix. I'm kind of determined not to have it happen here with Stitch Fix, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, look, Stitch Fix is mainly, not all, but mainly women's kind of pretty nice clothing, subscription clothing. Let's talk about the complete opposite and turn over to the company we want to talk about today. Men running around in their underwear. That's WWE. I think, full disclosure, both of us have a position in it, but why don't you just lay it out for us? Why are you so interested in the WWE today?
Well, a little bit of background. I've been following the company, since it went public. I think this is the third major time that we found the shares, a pretty compelling bargain. In general, though, I think it's a way better business than the market currently thinks. I found the valuation very compelling, and that there were a number of opportunities for kind of upside potential embedded in the share price. And just to be completely upfront, we bought a lot of our shares, between 38, and 44. So the share price has moved up a bit since I think we first started speaking about it a bit, maybe in December. But still think the shares represent excellent value, and that this is a way better business than I think Wall Street currently understands. And there has been just a massive transformation of the business model over time. The deal this week with Comcast kind of highlights that the company is a licensing machine now. Kind of think about it, how crazy that is. We're in COVID. There's no live events, and they're going to have record revenues next year. It's an absolutely stunning transformation from a regional wrestling company, touring company, to a company now that will get the majority of its revenues and profits from licensing IP. It's a stunning transformation that's occurred over the past 5 years or so.
Yeah, and look, I think one of the things I think bulls know, but bears forget, like WWE Network, when did he launch that? Like 2013 is when he launched it. Like he was one of the first persons to see the value in going direct to consumer. And it's really interesting that WWE, we were going to do this podcast earlier this week, and they announced the sale of WWE Network domestic earlier this week. But it is interesting that they've decided, hey, we can't be a standalone product anymore. We're better off selling into we're better off selling and having Peacock kind of take over the WWE network. So how do you think about that transition from owning the direct consumer domestic to being basically a Peacock channel, having the wrestling Peacock channel?
Yeah, initially a year ago when they first talked about the potential sale of the network, and I just sale it's a little bit of a confusing word potentially. It's licensing of the streaming rights for sure. And WWE has some assets there and whatnot, but ultimately they're back into licensing that out, those rights out for someone else to run. I think it. Vince is and the rest of the executives there. I think on many things they're ahead of the curve, and they may be again here. It's a sign that perhaps niche products are best suited by being part of a larger conglomerate that has multiple properties and can leverage fixed expenses across a variety of viewership. I'm not using the right word. Might have to edit this part out. A variety of platforms and whatnot. So NBC brings a tremendous amount of scale to this property, and I think it highlights the fact that the days of the niche direct to consumer brand may be somewhat limited. Would we be here if the network had 3.5 or 4 million subscribers? The WWE network. Perhaps not, but maybe still. Ultimately, I think this is a great transaction, for everyone. Again, it really further de-risks the whole WWE business model to have such a, large chunk of high, very profitable, high margin revenues coming in. But it allows WWE to do what it does best, and also NBC Universal to do what it does best. They both got back into their, more of their core business, distribution versus content ownership. And, I guess if it was really easy to run a wrestling league, Comcast could have not licensed it and try to do it on their own, and then vice versa. Perhaps WWE is no longer best suited by trying to, seek an audience directly itself. There's a lot of costs. Technology is always changing. There's a lot of infrastructure required to do this. And Netflix brings massive scale and subscriber dollars to bear upon those problems. It's much harder for a company like WWE to do that. So to get out of that and refocus on the core business and get paid essentially more revenues than it was generating by running the network itself. Those are all great wins, and I think it's going to be great for the WWE fans. They potentially are going to be paying less for the service if they kind of don't mind bundling it and seeing a bit of advertising. They can keep the service that they currently have, if they continue to pay the premium. So I think it's an awesome deal, and we're not surprised by it. There was it's been discussed for a while. There was a little bit of lull because of the whole virus recession and whatnot, but Netflix is not going to be the only company with a streaming bundle. There's going to be other ones, and there's going to be other types of content. So sports and other live events, they deserve a home from a streaming partner. So I think it's an awesome deal, and really just again further de-risks WWE's business model and makes it even more high quality than it was before.
So I think the bull case for the WWE is right now you're paying, I think the enterprise value is around $5 billion right now, right? And this year they're going to be approaching $300 million in EBITDA post the Peacock deal. I think they said, hey, once we get the touring going, we'll probably be 15% higher than that, right? So you're paying, call it 12 to 13 times normalized EBITDA for this company. I think the bull case is, hey, everything is incremental here, right? We have super high engagement on YouTube. If we can figure out how to monetize that YouTube, if hey, when our Peacock deal's up, if there's a bidding war for the next rights, all this sort of stuff. How do you look at paying $5 billion for the WWE, and how do you kind of paint that upside when you make this investment?
Yeah, look, I guess they had EV a little bit lower. they have a net cash position. They'll continue to generate cash. And, when we're converting the in the money convert into equity. So I think, low 4 billions, 4.5 billion, I think is the EV, I tend to think about, and I think we are looking at low 300s of, adjusted EBITDA for 2021. So, the valuation is not, it's not too demanding there. Again, it was lower, not too long ago. But if you look at other content owning companies, the valuations are significantly higher, in the high teens and low 20s. You can even look at, the historical valuation for WWE, at kind of about 18 times. Now, keep in mind, that was some of those valuations, came at a time when, the licensing revenue was much smaller than it is now. So I think that's too low of a valuation for a business of this quality. And the times that we've purchased it in the past most aggressively, have tended to coincide with periods where there's question marks around engagement and ratings and whatnot. And we don't think that WWE is uniquely declining in ratings versus other kind of sports properties and other live properties. There are declines across across linear TV, that can't be denied, but it remains a very, very competitive market to license and retain content, and that evidenced itself earlier this week with the deal they struck with Comcast. So that's great. So I just think this is a much better business than people think. I'm very hopeful that some of the new executives, especially Nick Khan, will come in and look at the business kind of much more creatively than they had in the past. I think there's amazing opportunities too, to license content to new companies and new potential platforms. I think of unique digital memorabilia, is a potentially very interesting thing. The NXT property is potentially up for renewal this year. And if you just kind of step back a little bit, when they've blown up the licensing revenue as big as they have, it does beg the question of like, what's the best way to run the business? Yeah, we're still a touring business. You don't want to like walk away from the roots of the company, but might it make sense, instead of doing that incremental house show, might it make sense to invest some of that time and energy into other short form video content and other platforms where you make sure you're chasing your fans into the next platform and engaging younger generation on a platform that maybe they're more comfortable with. And it's possible that you kind of see some changes there that could have the effect of lowering travel costs and some OpEx, lowering wear and tear on the performers and injuries, which is a real thing. So I do think there's a level of openness here and creativity that could be quite interesting. And you go back over time. I mean, you just got to give Vince McMahon and the other executives at the company just tremendous credit. And it does sometimes really surprise me how much the world has changed and how much the businesses have changed. And yet WWE here is going to produce record revenues and record profitability over the next few years. Think about it. This was a touring company that got onto TV, that then got onto cable, and then had to make a transition via the internet, and then from the internet to the mobile phone and all that kind of stuff, and all these new platforms like Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, everything. Here they are after all these years. They've made that transition almost seamlessly. They have huge engagement on all these new platforms. You would think their market would say, well, WWE, they deserve some credit. They've made these transformations look easy, and they're not necessarily easy. So the whole idea that there's going to be a generation that skips wrestling, I view that as there's almost no risk of that. And I would just think that the company has has demonstrated that they know how to transition between platforms, maybe about as well as anyone. So I think the valuation is very undemanding for a business of this quality. I'll also say, this is a very competitive company. They want to do really well. From the IPO until now, with the dividends reinvested, they've beat the market. Sometimes do I think that the company, could do more and should do more, and do I get a little bit impatient sometimes with them? Yeah, but I think it's in their DNA to agree with me that at times I think they've underperformed their true potential, and I think that I'm hopeful, that as we go forward, they'll continue to think creatively around their business model. They'll continue to drive value for shareholders. So I don't know. I just, again, for a business of this quality that has this proven track record, that has, I would call it semi-permanent IP, it's too cheap of a price, even though it's up, $10 or $11 from kind of when I think you and I briefly discussed it in December.
So there's a lot I want to dive in there, but let's start with the bear cases, and you've hit on them a little bit. But I think whenever I talk to anyone, there are two bear cases I always get hit with. The first is, yes, 12 times EBITDA, 12, 13, whatever it is probably too cheap for a business of this quality, right? Like, you look at anything else that owns its IP, they're going to go 20x EBITDA minimum. And if they've got the growth potential that I think WWE is often a lot higher. But I think the pushback a lot of people give is, hey, earnings went from under $100 million per year to approaching $300 million per year, driven by this mammoth boost in their TV contract that they got in 2018. And people look forward to 2023, 2024, when the Fox deal expires, and they say, hey, ratings are way down since Fox signed that deal. When that contract is up, the next contract is going to be flat or down. And you're going to see, yeah, you pay 12 times this year's EBITDA, but if you look forward to 2025, when you get this contract reset, it's going to be 20 times 4 years EBITDA after that contract reset or whatever. How would you respond to that bear case?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Who's making the prediction of what the renewal rights is going to be in 3 years from now?
The ephemeral day is making the prediction.
Could happen. And I think when the shares were, in the mid 40s, it was pricing in a down round. And, I think there has been, a number of properties that have indicated that the down rounds is probably not in the cards right now. Maybe it will be at one point in the future. I still don't think at these prices, especially with the new streaming deal rights, that there's a lot of enthusiasm kind of priced into domestic TV rights renewing in a couple of years. And these are binary events, so I can't deny that there would be some risk there. Fox decided they wanted SmackDown, and they got it, and that created a kind of a new dynamic for bidding. Now Comcast has come back and said, hey, we're really interested in the streaming rights, and we want to have a presence. When the world rebundles, digitally, we're going to be there. We'll see where NXT goes from here. Does Fox take a crack at that? Does Comcast want to secure that? Does Comcast want everything back the next go around? I don't know. Like, there's all different kind of ways, parameters this could play out. But look, it is a risk. Cord cutting is a risk. The last go around, though, Fox went for it anyway. There was a direct-to-consumer network that was like out there and still growing and beaming lots of content to engage fans. And cord cutting was occurring then, and yet they still wanted to pay up for the assets. And you scratch your head, like, why did that happen? It's a very simple answer. It's still a very, very competitive market for content. And you start pulling out pieces of content. Now, I'll give up on Monday night. I'll give up on Friday night. I won't renew, some of those baseball games. You start pulling out some of this stuff, guess what's going to happen? It's going to decelerate faster. You'll accelerate cord cutting. So it's a very competitive market. Now that won't, they can't shrink forever and keep paying more, dollars for the rights. So, is there a non-standard renewal out there? Potentially. And then when that happens too, you would say, well, the streaming rights are more valuable. So sometimes it's like, who cares what each of the individual pieces are worth, right? Can WWE continue to kind of walk up the steps and step up their licensing rights over time, using the combination of everything that they have, including NXT, including the streaming rights, including pay-per-views, including, again, new platforms, virtual reality, all that kind of stuff, Oculus. Yeah, I think so. I think they'll be able to do that. That's what they've done historically. So I think clearly there's some risk around the TV contract. Again, it's a very competitive market for content. I think it will remain so.
When they moved to Fox, I mean, obviously I was excited. I think it was a 4x step up in the rights value for SmackDown. So, anybody's going to be excited with that big of an increase. But when they moved to Fox, one of the things I was really excited about was they're going to advertise for WWE. If you watch football, Thursday Night Football, there's an advertisement. Hey, tomorrow night, SmackDown, Fox, 8 o'clock or whatever. It's going to be on Fox. And they advertise on Thursday Night Football. They advertise Sunday Night Football. I mean, there's a lot of advertising behind it. And I was kind of excited. I thought, hey, this might bring in a couple new fans, and I've just been a little bit disappointed I haven't really seen any evidence of that. Have you been disappointed by the lack of kind of momentum from the move to Fox?
No, not really. And look, we're in a unique environment here, right?
True. It's
live shows.
6 months in, you get the pandemic. Yeah. You had a great tweet that said, hey, the pandemic, wrestling is men running around in underwear. And I watched a couple shows right after the pandemic. It was very silly without a crowd in there, right? It's just a man in his underwear in a ring kind of monologuing. Can you talk about how you think that might actually, in the long run, take WWE to the next level?
Yeah, so I tweeted a little bit about this, and it was kind of a semi-organic, thought. I was watching a podcast with Bill Burr, a comedian, who kind of talked about, how different it is now performing without a live audience, and you develop kind of new muscle memory. And then I watched, and actually I might even play it on my phone. Did you watch the Drew McIntyre podcast on Stone Cold Steve Austin's?
I did not.
It was just absolutely amazing. And he said some things that just really got my attention. He talked about, he was asked, well, what do you want for 2021? And he was like, fans. And it's just like a minute-long conversation ensued about how important fans are. And he just said, boy, the product is going to get so much better when the fans are back in. And it just got me thinking that these performers, who are very talented, they're talented with their bodies, obviously, and their athletic abilities, but, they're also performers. And they've had to, just like Bill Burr, they've had to kind of figure out and feel their way around how to do this without the roar of the crowd. It makes, in a certain sense, it makes it kind of more difficult. Other areas, maybe it makes it a bit more easy. But I just kind of came up with this idea that, when maybe not unlike how concerts will be, when someone goes to a concert again, that's going to feel really good. It's going to be really exciting. When WWE opens up the kimono on like, we're live, here it is, there's a real audience here, and the performers are into it, and it's all kind of clicking. I don't think it's going to be like, hey, it'll get turned on and it'll be back the way it was before. I think it's going to go through like a bit of a renaissance where people are just absolutely bonkers for it for some period of time. So to kind of judge the ratings now, and by the way, their innovation in the Thunderdome and everything like that, like that's been all good. That's an improvement. That costs money. They're doing that. When it all comes back on, I just think it's going to be better. And I got to say, when Drew McIntyre kind of was talking about this on the podcast, it just really, really struck a chord with me. I was wildly impressed by him and his story and everything that he said. But he just said it so succinctly that I made mental note of it.
So I'm from New Orleans, and I remember after Katrina, that first football game where the Saints came back and they played the Falcons in the Superdome. And I mean, just the air, it was incredibly electric, and they blocked the punt and they won the game. And I mean, it really deepened the bond between the football team and the city. And I think it took the Saints fandom to the next level. And I can't help but wonder that first time where the WWE has a packed house and there's tens of thousands of people in there, or you're a huge WWE fan and you're watching, you're going to feel that electricity. And I think it might take that bond that millions of people have with WWE to the next level. Or it might, if you're a kid or you're somebody in there and you watch for the first time, it might create that bond for you.
I think that's a great analogy. I didn't know that occurred down in New Orleans. It makes perfect sense. I'm excited to see what it's going to look like when they really turn it back on. And look, there's going to be some period of time where they're touring and they're doing live events, and they won't be able to sell out. There'll be some social distance there too. So they'll be operating kind of suboptimally as they kind of turn the engine back on. But I think when that engine turns over, it's going to roar. So I think and that's like, you can't put that in a spreadsheet. I think it's going to happen. So
second bear risk I hear all the time, WWE, is the Vince McMahon risk, right? He's 75. I think, obviously, I think people can tell you and I have a lot of respect for him, but I do think there is something for the past 5 years, it feels like the company's excuse for ratings or anything has always been, hey, the storyline isn't where we want to be. There's been a lot of management turmoil. I do think there's some questions, especially when XFL 2 was launching. I know a lot of people said he's distracted. There were a lot of people who said, oh my God, I hope the WWE doesn't put a single dollar into this. There was tons of worries about that. But I think there's a lot of pessimism over Vince McMahon. So how would you respond to that?
I have a lot of respect for him. I've met him once, and I think he's a visionary. He's done a tremendous job over time. Like I said before, I do think there's still a lot of potential that at times is kind of going untapped at the company. But I don't have a huge fear there. I don't know. I always used to think there's no way WWE kind of ever gets sold or works in someone else's hands. And I still think that's the case. But I don't know if they'll sell one day or consider becoming part of a larger media conglomerate. That's certainly possible. But on the flip side, look, Vince McMahon's going to live forever, so that's not really a worry. But just in case that's not true, he's got a deep bench, and it's all family. Linda ran the company, his wife, for years before, after the IPO, and she was great. I had a good relationship with her. I thought she was just absolutely awesome. She could do it again. He's got 2 children in the business. He's got a son-in-law in the business who seems to be pretty darn good at this.
Yeah.
So if something were to occur overnight and he was unavailable, for service, I don't think that would be a terrible issue. And I do think, again, that some of the new executives and their ability to look at this business and look at it creatively and think, what else can we do? How can we make the product better? And how can we drive value for shareholders? Which, they've done a good job with over time. And they seem to be hardcore capitalists. I don't think they're not doing this for charity. Certainly the family and Vince care about the legacy a lot. They care about the fans a lot. I remember once, I heard a lot of stories over the years from current executives, former executives. I don't care. One was like, Vince doesn't care if they're, booing or cheering. It doesn't matter as long as there's like heavy emotion in it. They want reaction. So I know people criticize the product and Vince and this and that. And I'm a more casual wrestling fan, which is, when I first got involved in the company, I had no interest in wrestling at all. And now I kind of find it interesting and entertaining. And I got a couple characters that I kind of think are superstars that are, that are interesting to follow and, comical at times what they do and how they do everything. But I lost my train of thought for a second. Remind me where we were talking about.
You were talking about, we started off by talking about the deep bench, and then you were going to how you became a casual fan.
Yeah. So, I'm still really.
That's okay. Actually, so you mentioned your casual fanship, and I think this is another thing that kind of relates to the bear thesis, right? Like, wrestling is a superstar-driven sport, as all sports are, right? Like when the NBA has LeBron James in the finals, ratings are higher. For wrestling, when they have Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold or The Rock, ratings are going to be higher than when they don't have that. And for the past few years, they had John Cena, who was obviously a superstar, and then Roman Reigns. And I think they've had trouble kind of getting that next superstar. Are you concerned at all about they just haven't had anyone really break through that next level?
No, not really. They've always gotten that stuff right over time, historically, while I've been following it. And those have been great times to, own the equity at reasonable prices when that level of concern is high. So I think they've shown an ability to reinvent themselves. Well, I've talked about all the transitions for various platforms over time, which has been kind of breathtaking. And along with that has been kind of, talent ebbs and flows over time. So I guess getting, back to your question, I don't put a whole lot of risk in wrestling not being able to captivate, audiences. Keep in mind too, AEW kind of sprung into existence. The amount of live wrestling content on TV, well, not year over year. I think they've lapped that, but you kind of go back maybe 18 months ago, there were a lot fewer hours of live wrestling entertainment on TV than there are now. And go back before then, there wasn't a direct-to-consumer network, so there is a lot more engagement, a lot more out there overall. Now, part of that's NXT as well. Part of that, is a new competitor, but you add all those viewers up, and the sport looks pretty darn healthy. Other sports have done it too, right? They've gone on additional nights that didn't exist before. So I think engagement's high. And again, every time there's a new platform out, WWE's there. They push the envelope on all these new platforms. So, I suppose it's a risk that they won't develop new talent and that appeals to a different generation and existing fans. But that's their job. That's what they do. That's what they do better than just about anyone. And they have that legacy. They have that ability to have a son, a father, and a grandfather kind of all watching at once and having characters, current characters and older characters and retired characters that appeal to all of them and still speaks to all of them. That's not easy to do. And a brand new league kind of can't do that overnight.
Yep.
Having years and years, decades of stories, and just epic matches and wild things that have happened that people would remember for 10 years. There's tradition in WWE that doesn't exist with other leagues.
So I mentioned I'm from New Orleans, and maybe 4 years ago now, WrestleMania was in New Orleans, and I managed to get tickets to it, and I went, and I watched wrestling when I was a kid, but I'm by no means a super fan. I just went because I was like, this is WrestleMania. I was interested in the stock. It was one of the craziest nights I've ever been to. Like, first, just the flights going in were 100% wrestling fans. Everyone there knew every story, every chant, everything. It was crazy. It was literally, they call it the Super Bowl of wrestling. It was like the Super Bowl, and you don't get that level of passion and that level of tradition, as you said. You can't get that overnight with the AEW, right? Like, it's very difficult to pull a WWE fan who's been going to WrestleMania for 20 years or watching it with the same 10 people for the past 5 years. Very difficult to pull them over. So I'm with you. Like, this is why it's hard launching a new sport, right?
Yeah. Well, look, it's intriguing to me that USA is going to pull over some new content. I think of like a traditional hockey fan, and how, when the playoffs come, how electric those games are, and how much loyalty there is. And NASCAR has people like that too, that I've been going to that race and sitting in that place and pulling my RV up for all those years. I think this exists with wrestling. And again, I think there's wonderful opportunities for this company to continue to innovate, to tweak its business model. It certainly has. Again, how do you not give these guys some credit? Like, someone's gonna be like, oh, the ratings are weak. Oh, they can't replace this person. Like, they've been doing this for 20 years. They've been doing it well for 20 years. I mean, my God, please give them some credit. Maybe this time I'm wrong. Maybe this time it's curtains down on Vince McMahon. I doubt it.
So you mentioned USA pulling in content, and when I first started researching this and kind of dreamed with my big bull landscape thesis, I looked in last year at one point Netflix, 2 of their top 10 shows were produced by the WWE. I think it was the Main Event, and the Big Show. And then, the Andre the Giant documentary on HBO was a hit. The Vince McMahon documentary on HBO has tons of buzz about it. I think that comes out next year. WWE's the 5th most popular YouTube channel last year. I think traditionally it's normally been about number 2, but it's the 5th most popular channel overall. When you look at all of that landscape, like how does that paint into your thesis for the WWE?
I didn't even mention YouTube. Funny, like I said, all these other platforms, of course, I left out YouTube. It's indicative of a company that has embedded itself into culture.
Yep.
I think it's semi-permanent. And again, as you pointed out, it seems silly at times, with grown men throwing themselves around, clad in bikinis. And
that's how Vince described it. That's not my words. That's how Vince described it.
I described it, I used it, I think it's a Cibelli original. I used to call it soap opera for men.
Yep.
Is a nice way of describing it. Yes, of course, women watch it as well. I look, there's evidence to it. It's not only popular in the US, it's popular in many other countries. There's other leagues internationally that have existed for a long period of time. There's something about this content that just appeals to people, and I think will continue to appeal to them. No one worried, baseball and the ratings of baseball and hockey has gone through some wild swings, right? And there's a strike and all that kind of stuff. No one says, I'm not sure anyone will watch the NHL anymore or MLB. And WWE holds its own against non-playoff basketball during the winter and other things. They do amazingly well against all sorts of properties that people don't think, don't ascribe a lot of risk to, them not existing anymore. So I don't know. I do put a little risk on that. I'll highlight my risks. We talk decline in linear TV. That's a risk. I can't deny it. It's there. But I think the market is going to be so darn competitive that they'll do fine. I don't think they'll have a big down round. It's certainly possible. I think they may have a nice hefty increase. And there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle to play with, to move things around, to do, some of their marquee events. Again, the NXT property, streaming rights, which we're now addressed in new platforms. So I think there's a lot of things to potentially play with. One thing I can't not say is that, Vince has pushed the envelope at times. Is there a risk that he overinvests in the product or he tries new things that don't bear fruit? Yes, we've been around for a while. There was I think it was called The World. I can't remember, but the restaurants, they did a huge restaurant in Times Square. And it didn't work out so well. They were trying to be the next kind of Planet Hollywood. They're going to be all over the world and generate tons of money. That didn't work out. The first version of the XFL didn't work out. There were a lot of movies made. I think that churned a lot of dollars and a lot of time and energy and didn't produce much. So, we build in our model a fair amount of OpEx against rising licensing revenues, and I think that's realistic. So over-investing in the product, or maybe not optimizing, profitability as much as maybe someone else might. I do think that's a risk. At the same time, offsetting that, Vince he's very rational. We witnessed him do multiple rounds of layoffs and cutbacks when it made sense. Did he, shut off some of these money-losing ventures that he tried when, it made sense to do so? He did that. I think these are unemotional decisions made by a businessman, that is interested in, growing the value of the shares that he and his family own, which are, rather substantial, huge economics still. So I do think that, there's the market does have a bit of worry that, hey, these are great deals, but maybe the profits won't flow through as much as you think. And I think there's some validity to that. And again, at the same time, people gave him a very hard time when he launched the network, the direct-to-consumer network, which led, proved out the whole model. He was very early in that and ultimately led to a very nice deal that they announced this week. that was seemingly crazy at the time, but was a great bet. So, I do worry about, overinvestment, in the product, maybe a little bit too much OpEx at times. But I can't say that, that's a massive problem. I worry about it. And I'd say that, the last one is I do think they have, somewhat of a mixed record for capital allocation.
Yep.
You know, they they like dividends. They kind of got that right. I do think the companies, there's two major tools for returning capital to shareholders, dividends and buybacks. The buyback piece, I would say I've personally found disappointing, over time, and we've talked to them about that, and we would like to see better there. But we pushed them in 2003 to do buybacks at $6 or $7. Those would have made a lot of sense and been good ones to do. We pushed them again in 2013, maybe at 12 or $12 or so, something like that. So over a very long period of time, we've tried to get them to be more open and have a kind of more robust, well thought out return of capital strategy. Certainly, we like our management teams to be opportunistic. When the shares are undervalued, we think companies, especially with good balance sheets and locked in revenue from contracts, those kinds of things present nice opportunities for management teams and boards. And I do think they've been, for some reason, a bit passive about looking at repurchasing shares aggressively. And again, we have a good relationship with them. We like them. We love them. We have talked to them about this, and it's rare to have a shareholder be able to say, I talked to you about this, 15 years ago. I talked to you about this 8 years ago. I'm talking, to you about it now. I really think I'm right. I really think I'm right. I think the shares would make great sense to retire shares from here. So that's another thing I worry about. Some of the other stuff, that the wrestling is going to, lose popularity and the flame will flicker out. I have very little fear there. Perhaps that, I could be proven wrong, or, the period of less engagement could last longer. But, like if you're just only looking at ratings, that's not the only place that WWE lives. It lives everywhere. Yeah. It's just transitioned so nicely to all the new platforms. It's wildly impressive to me.
It's just funny because, I'm an NBA fan. For a long time. I had an investment in MSG, and there's worries about basketball's rating, but everybody says basketball's the future, the international growth prospects, which we haven't even talked about WWE International. I don't know if we've got enough time, but the international prospects, the Twitter engagement, all this sort of stuff. And WWE has all that. And you mentioned the ratings. WWE over the summer, I sent you this, Lakers Nuggets conference finals gets 1.5 million viewers. WWE Raw, same night, 2 million viewers. It's outperforming the NBA playoff Western Conference Finals with LeBron James in it. I just think the engagement is so huge here. Look, anything else you want to talk about with the WWE? Any risks you worry about? Anything you're especially excited for?
Let's see. I think we might have covered, a decent amount here. I think I do think one interesting kind of important factor is WWE controls all of its rights, and there's not too many people you have to call and pick up the phone if you're interested in a property they have or doing something. So they have all the rights cleared, and they're available fairly cleanly in any country or even globally potentially when folks want them. So I think one of their advantages is that they've made themselves easy to work with. They deliver a clean, finished product to distributors, and it makes it very valuable. So I think with NXT, I think with some of these alternative platforms, I think with some of the unique things that are happening here, in a digital environment where we kind of maybe are going to create new forms of memorabilia. I think these are fascinating things. I think Nick Khan and other executives there are going to be very, very focused on that. And again, getting out of the business of running the network probably is going to be a nice positive for them. I always always love when companies kind of focus on core operations or business gets spun off and like all they do is think about this. All they do is think about that product, nothing else. You know, there's an element of that here. And it was, look, it was a surprise, you know, the executive changes that occurred last year. And I think those were great executives that left, you know, and I don't know the whole story behind why that occurred, but, you know, George did a fabulous job over time and he was the face of the company to a lot of the shareholders. So, you know, there's a bit of a new team here, you know, and that takes a while for Wall Street, you know, for that team to build credibility with outside investors.
Yep.
But I think they have such an opportunity here. Again, for all the disappointment, the stock was $100, just about $100 2 years ago. It got down to low as 38. You know, here we are up a little bit. You go back all the way to the IPO, they outperformed the market. That's really impressive. You know, I think when they go all in on some of these new business ventures, international licensing, some of those opportunities, and then just consider what's the best way to run the business going forward. You know, maybe some of their regional centers could become a little bit of a destination. Will the fans come to them more? We used to go around and see all the fans, and we'll do that. That's the core business, and that's the roots of this company. But might it make sense that we have some places where fans would come to see, so they're not always running around everywhere, and again, less wear and tear on the performers and saving some expenses while you're doing that. It's just all these things it's just for a company with strong content, great content, you know, these are all possibilities.
Yep. That's great. All right, last question. You got to ask it for a WWE podcast. Favorite WWE superstar?
I do have a couple favorites. You know, I like Drew McIntyre a lot here since he did that podcast. I mean, I just was blown away by some of the things he said and his whole story. I didn't realize there's a shortage of Scottish wrestlers, and so he's broken through at a level that didn't exist. I love Finn Balor, who just, you know, he's an NXT star, and he just has this look and athletic ability that I just wildly impressed by. My favorite is RKO though, and I don't know how it happened. He's just such a bad character, and you know who doesn't want to see him lighting up the Fiend on a Sunday night? Like, why, you know, who wouldn't want to see that? So I just love the way he performs, what he does, how he carries himself. He's I kind of like him. He's probably my favorite of all the whole crew.
For me, it's you know, I'm a child of the '90s, and I'm not just saying this. I've got years of blog posts that reiterate, I love The Rock, man. I love The Rock. But Stone Cold Steve Austin I love as well. Have you ever watched his what is it, Broken Skull Challenge?
No. I think he interviews people very well. I think he could carry that show and interview all sorts of people, politicians, perhaps, or former presidents, maybe even. Like he knows how to talk to people. He's great. And of course, I didn't say The Rock because like everyone knows The Rock.
My wife told me I'd be basic if I did it. No, but on Stone Cold, you know, it's easy to look at these guys as giant, muscle-bound men in underwear, but you forget, like, these guys are so charismatic, and it kind of loops back to the point we made, like, for them to be in their underwear without any fans and like put out a workable product that still 1.5 million people every week are viewing, I think both speaks to their talent and the level of engagement and fan passion for this product. And, you know, again, once fans are back in the stands, I think it's going to be great. But Broken Skull Challenge was awesome. You should watch it at some point. I'm a huge fan of Stone Cold.
I will. Are we going to have you know, Rock, he's going to be president one day, right? I'm sure. Wouldn't that be a trip?
I'd vote for him. He might be. You know, his endorsement of Biden might have swung some votes over there. So anyway, any last words before we wrap this up?
No, I appreciate you having me on again. It's fun talking about this one. This is a fun one, and hopefully it's fun and profitable too over time. I think it will be.
Hey, well, Mario, thank you so much for coming on. I'm looking forward to 2022, heading over to MSG and catching a WWE, Raw, SmackDown, whatever it's going to be, catching that with you. So thanks again for coming on, and we'll chat soon.
All right, thank you.